here in Rooks Park in Walla, and this is a live part you asked for. And I'm not going to answer any of your questions because I'm here with the people live. And if you want to support my work at the end of this, or anybody who's rewatching the video, you know, follow the link in my bio, find my shop, call things home. All that stuff is helpful. Sharing, you know, and liking, notifications on, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I'm going to push you aside. I don't know if you hear me through the microphone or not, so I'm going to make sure that people come next to me to ask a question, but also they can write down their questions, and if they ask it from afar, I'll say it out loud, all the things that everybody yelled at me from before. So, and then I'm pretty sure the guy lurking in the background is my husband, and he's going to be answering and moderating, so if anybody is an asshole in here, he's going to kick you out. Okay, so who wants to go first? Got a question? Oh yeah, I forgot the yeses. I need 2 yeses from them. Okay, so the first yes is, do you all consent to be on my YouTube video?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and do you all understand that this isn't medical advice? We're just having a nice day, hanging out, talking about things in the park.
Yes.
Okay, now we can get started. They remembered for me, so that works. I'm gonna push this way back so I don't magpie try to look at the, because that'll happen. I'll be like, oh, they asked a question. Oh, they asked a question. He didn't put ice in my lemon infusion. I was like, that was unsettling. I'm like, it's warm. Okay, I like it cold. It tastes so much better cold.
I have ice in my car.
That's okay. I just didn't expect it warm, you know, when you expect something
Yeah.
cold and you're like, oh. Okay, so who has first question and wants to get started? Who's brave? You are brave. What's your, you're gonna question? Okay.
No, it's not.
She has a question.
How do you start your morning? Like,
Okay.
what do you do for like food or tea? Or...
So the question is, how do I start my morning, in case nobody hears it, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I have all my shit together. Usually I wake up, and if I'm lucky, I'm the only one awake. I wake up pretty early, and then the night before I might have made and infused, like I'll take chamomile and lavender and like maybe put like 1/4 cup of it in a quart, and then put cold water over top of it and sit it in the fridge. Now you can't use hot because it would extract too many of the VOCs. And then I strain that and I add a bunch of sugar because I don't give a fuck. And then I mean, it's just pure energy. And then I add usually some raw milk to it. And then I have to start cooking breakfast. I try to get that ready before our plan in my head. I do not do it the night before like I should. I'm just like, okay, I lay there in bed, I'm like, what can I make? Like, what do I have in there, you know? And then the rest of my morning is pretty dedicated to helping my daughter eat. She lives with an eating disorder, so it's very like, let's take a bite, let's do this, we can do this. And some days she does it on her own, but I can tell when she's struggling. So like most of my morning is composed of that, you know. Most of my days are composed of that for the past 2 years. Really, that's what I do when I'm not working, is help her through stuff, you know, and that's been hard. But and then after breakfast, I've started doing like a tea time ritual with like ridiculously nice green teas and white teas. I decided I needed it to lower my glutamine levels in my brain, and I found that all the commercial stuff, I'm like, this tastes like shit. There has to be like something better. And so I got kind of compulsive about learning about teas and started ordering them from faraway places, and like different, like, how am I getting out like the theanine instead of the like all the lectins that make your mouth, you know, acidic and dry, and how do I, and so that's been a nice morning ritual. And I bought myself a really nice little cast iron teapot, and I felt so guilty for it, but I was like, this thing will be in my, it better be in my family forever, you know what I mean? Because I did look online, and this is just my brain drifting, I was looking on Amazon for one, right? And then I was like, well, maybe I should just Google and see if somebody's written one of those, you know, 10 best and go through them, you know, even though they're paid for it, you try to see. And then I was like, oh, fucking teapot cancer from teapots in China. And I was like, son of a bitch. And so I went down the rabbit hole that if you want to buy a nice traditional teapot that's meant for like green teas and white teas, make sure it comes from Japan. Japan doesn't fuck around like with their level of quality that they need for like they both have really strong tea cultures, but Japan isn't cranking them out by the millions for the American consumer. And so I did a lot of research, and I had it in my cart for like 3 months because it was stupid expensive. And I was like, I didn't have to get one that expensive, but I was like, that one was just.
You're gonna get one.
I know. I was like, you know, that those levels of reasoning you do, and you're like, I shouldn't buy this, but then it'll, you know, and like you slowly just like gaslight yourself into purchasing it, and that it's okay, and that's exactly what I did. But it does bring me a lot of joy. Some days I don't have the time or space to do that. So I've also been really into making cold brewed green tea, especially with like the needle versions, which is just what they mean when they pick the very first top leaf that comes out in spring. And those ones are a lot sweeter and more floral, especially with a cold brew. But I find when I warm brew them, they don't really have a whole lot of flavor. But white teas are really, I mean, there's not much flavor there because they're so young, but they're loaded with amino acids. So it's like, but what's interesting with the cold brew is that it has more flavor when I brew it cold than it does if I brew it warm. And I think it's because it has a longer time to extract all of like the phenols and things like that without being overbearing. And here's the crazy thing. It takes like 2 to 4 tablespoons to make a whole half-gallon batch. So you feel guilty with how much it costs you to buy that quality of tea, but it's like, it lasts me forever. And you can usually make 2 brews with it. Most people in America, I'm discovering, they make like a thing of green tea or a high quality white tea, they brew it once and they're done. But if you look at Japan or China, they have whole thing, they're brewing it like 4 or 5 times and talking about the different tastes and the different, and so it's been a nice thing that's been keeping me busy.
What did you say, like at the beginning? What kind did you get?
Silver needle, I like that one, but anything that they call like first needle or first flush or needle in general just means when they gathered the tea from the tea plant, it was the needle is the very first tip that comes out of the plant. That's it. And I mean, they're harvesting they're making this big thing by just one. First flush is the very first leaves that open within a few days of opening. And then it goes to like the premium grade is like it's been like a week. And then like all the stuff that like Americans get chopped up and added in bags is all the older shit that they pick afterwards, you know? But there's some
There's
pretty.
a lot to learn about tea.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating, and especially as somebody who used to be there's like L-theanine, I think I'm saying that right, in green tea, and it's really calming to the brain. It stimulates GABA in your brain, which is a type of amino acid that makes you feel calm. If they put you on benzodiazepine medications, which will fucking not great for you, what happens is it floods your brain constantly with GABA acid. It literally, like, imagine somebody like kicked down the door for your GABA receptors and then stuck a fucking board in there so you couldn't shut it. And then this other thing just turned the faucet up all the way. That's basically what benzos do, so you walk around not feeling anything. But in small amounts, it helps you feel calm. But it's only present in green tea and not in coffee. So when you drink the caffeine from the green tea, it balances out your potential anxiety response to caffeine. If I drink coffee, it'll fuck me up. This is me natural, like non-stimulated. In fact, I took some chamomile and lavender and I'm feeling kind of sleepy. So I don't need any help to go faster in my brain. So I was a little nervous about starting to use green tea or white teas, which is just a different phase of the tea. I found that it actually calms me down because of the L-theanine in it, you know, and I thought that was just a really neat thing to discover, you know, because as Americans, we're so hyper-focused on just coffee and the biggest amount of caffeine we can get at any given time, you know, but that has real ramifications on our body and our mind and our adrenals and everything else, you know. So that's what I do with my morning. I know.
How did you get rid of the dryness? Because I experienced that with those.
The dryness means that you're brewing it too long or too hot,
Okay.
where it dries out your mouth from all the tannins,
Yeah.
right? So you have to brew it lower or slower or like sooner, right? And so whatever type of tea you get, now if it just says green tea when you buy it, you can guess that it's probably not high quality. If it's high quality, it would say like Nepali green or Kuaman green. It's gonna hint to the region that it's from, right? I found this place, I think it's called Oregon Tea. I could be wrong. That's the first place I tried. They're out of Oregon. I think they're in Southern Oregon. And no, they're out of Springfield, outside of Eugene. And they had like a sampler pack, and I started that way with all their white teas. And I was like, all right, I like this one, don't like that one. This one's better cold brewed. And then that was cool because it was only like $40, and you got a good sample of all these different little teas. And then, because you don't want to like drop a ton of money if you don't know what flavor you're gonna like. And then I just fell down the rabbit hole of like how to properly brew these teas on YouTube. And then some of them, like if you get like a ripe puer, which is more like a black tea, but the way that they've processed it and like, I don't want to say fermented because it's not really fermented like a black tea is, but uh, it doesn't have any tannins left in it. It's so smooth. It's crazy. But if I buy a cheap one, it tastes like ass, right? And I'm like, oh, because I was like, oh, I like that, but this one looks a little cheaper. I'll buy it, and I'm like, big mistake. And I didn't even save that much money, and now I'm not going to drink it, right? And I think that's how I justify it, because if I buy something that saves me money, but it tastes like shit and I don't use it, it didn't save me money, you know? Um, but so yeah, I have really been enjoying working with, and I'm not an expert at it at all. I've only been at it like 4 or 5 months now, but it's been a really interesting experience. And my daughter likes tea time. She's like, the first time I was like, tea time, she's like, what? And I was like, it's tea time. And then she got really into it for quite a while. But she really likes a lot of sugar in hers, but I don't care. Some of them, I'm not gonna lie, I know that a lot of purists will say that you're not, if you have to add sugar, it's a bad tea. But with some of the silver needle teas, I find that like 1/4 teaspoon in this tiny little cup that I'm drinking, it makes it taste like caramel, and I don't even care. Like I'm gonna add a little sugar because I feel like I taste it without it, but then I feel like it also brings out a lot of the flavors too that you wouldn't taste otherwise, especially for those really light floral teas. And I'm like, whatever.
The honey would then take away from the flavor of
You could use honey. I did for a while, but you see me when I make a lot of my if I make like my electrolyte drinks, I'll use honey sometimes. But if it's a really light flavor, like the watermelon one, I like to use sugar because honey does have its own flavor. And sugar, it just tastes sweet. It doesn't have any like base layers. And honestly, honey and sugar, the only real difference is that honey happens to have some minerals and vitamins in it, maybe some probiotic, you know. Um, and I know that it's not a bad thing, but ultimately your body uses it the same. It's just pure energy. Every cell in your body needs glucose to thrive. And if you aren't eating carbohydrates in some way, your body's going to start jacking up your cortisol levels so it can digest your muscles, so it can get the glucose out of your meat. So eat some fucking carbohydrates. And people are like, oh, I started fasting and I feel so much better. And I'm like, yeah, well, stress hormones do that. When you stop eating, like your ancestors, when they stopped eating, it was because they didn't have access to food, and their body was like, oh shit, we need to give them this extra emergency boost of energy so they can go out and like find something, dig something, hunt something, steal something from somebody, or whatever had to happen to eat. And you feel really energized at first. You really do. But it's not meant for long term. And when we're constantly under eating, when we're constantly fasting, when especially women, most women, they'll be told that they should, you can eat, 1,800, 2,000 calories a day. I'm fucking serious. If you just lay in bed all day, at the bare minimum, you need 2,500 calories. If you're up working, raising kids, out, any level of stress, injury, your calorie intake needs could be upwards of 4,000 a day, depending on what you do. But we feel so goddamn guilty if we have any sort of fat accumulation on our body. you know? And then we're like, oh, we're so tired and burnt out all the time. I'm like, yeah, because we don't fucking eat. And then when they're like, oh, I'm stressed out, I'm craving sugar because I'm stressed out. I'm like, oh, it's almost like your body's like, hey, this is really going to calm down our nervous system and this is really going to give us energy. We need the sugar. You just have to ask yourself, does my body know how to ask for carbohydrates from non-processed things? If we're constantly craving candy bars, it's not that you can't find a high quality candy bar, it's that your body doesn't know anything else to ask. If you're not eating, high quality like squash or bread or root vegetables or fruit, it doesn't know what to ask for besides a fucking candy bar. Right? Our body, I hate when I see that shit online. Oh, if you're craving sugar, you need more protein. No, no. If you're craving sugar, you need sugar. If you're craving meat, you need meat. Your body didn't make a mistake in what it wanted for you. The society around you might have made a mistake of how it crams chemicals into that shit and gives it to you. And isn't it so funny that we always blame the sugar for the illness? Oh, don't eat that, it's got sugar and it's bad for you. I'm like, it's not, the sugar is the least thing I give the fuck about. What about the 87 chemicals that are like added to it? Like, it's not the sugar, it's the chemicals that are added to it. Now, of course, if you're dealing with like glucose issues, it's not a bad idea to have a fair amount of protein too. If you don't want your sugar to spike when you're eating, you need to eat protein first. And all it does is act as a buffer and it slows down the digestion process of the sugar. There's this lady, she's on Instagram, I think she goes by Glucose Goddess, I think is her name. She has been like tracking her glucose levels and how it affects like how she eats something for years. And so she's like, this is what it looks like if I just eat a piece of chocolate cake. This is what it looks like if I eat a little bit of protein and then some chocolate cake, or if I add some protein to my chocolate cake. Or this is what it looks like if I eat some chocolate cake and just go for a 10-minute walk. The difference is crazy. The difference is crazy in how your body uses it. Because remember, with the walking part, as you like build muscle and move your body, your muscles are eating glucose, right? And so if you just like pound a ton of sugar and then like don't move at all, it's not going to get moved into your muscles. So like if you have high blood sugar, if you're a pre-diabetic, type 1, type 2, if you have, well, more so for type 2, if you have high blood sugar in any given moment, like it's spiked, if you literally start like picking up some weights or walking around, it'll lower your blood sugar because your muscles are now using the glucose. Of course, it's more complicated as to like why you're insulin resistant, but knowing how the foods impact our insulin in general is a big way to healing insulin resistance or even our relationship with food. I watch my dad. Go through it, and I love my dad. He's an extremely intelligent man. But when it comes to his diet, because he gets his dopamine hits from food, he knows. He just, at this age, he just doesn't give a fuck, And I'm like, Dad, if you just could eat some more protein. But it's also hard because he lost a kidney to cancer and they're like, you can't eat red meat because the uric acid builds up really bad and he gets gout really easy. So I'm like, wait a minute, Dad. So at this point in your life, they're telling you that you can't really eat meat, but you also can't really eat carbohydrates. And you feel like shit because you still need both of those things. And I don't know. It's hard to watch, and I'm at the age with my parents where I'm having to be like, I can't save you because you don't want to save yourself, but it's also really hard because I was like super parentified, like I had to raise myself, so I feel like I have to like take care of them, and they would be furious if they heard me say it, but I think it's a really common thing that a lot of people go through. I want to be there for my parents. It's a huge part of our culture too, like, but it's still like, if I don't let it go and let him lie in his own bed, it'll just drive me crazy because nothing will ever change. It has to be his choice, right? But anyhow, I was like, if you just eat some fucking meat before you ate that, ate that thing or went for a walk, it would change your life, Okay, anybody else have a question? Sorry.
I'll go. So I've got this constant nausea issue going on, and I'm wondering if it's...
You're pregnant.
I know! All the symptoms of pregnancy. All of the symptoms of pregnancy. Morning sickness, irregular periods, and so much more. And my doctor suggested not doing the hormonal test, but I'm wondering if it, like, what herbs could fix that, or if it's about a diet, or maybe.
So the question was, in case nobody heard her, she's got constant like nausea and infrequent periods, right?
Yeah.
And just, do you have like tender breasts or anything like that too, or?
Not too often, not unless I'm PMSing.
Okay.
Their regular periods are more so just, I was TMI, but
It's okay.
constantly very heavy.
Uh-huh.
And
Like you fled the
but
first couple days?
When I first started my period, I was
Yeah.
constantly very heavy for the first 5 years, 6 years, but then it started going really light and then tapering and going back and forth and then heavy clotting.
Did your doctor say why they didn't want to give you a hormone panel? Because that seems kind of suspicious as fuck. Like, I mean,
Well, it seemed as if he didn't think that anything would
oh, it's a
show up.
guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it could be a couple things. Did it just start suddenly, or have you been dealing with it?
It's been going on for about 2 years now.
And did it just hit you like a ton of bricks suddenly?
Yeah.
And you're nauseated like all day long, and it's happening when you're not on your period too, right? Or okay.
Yeah, so it's not consistently happening all day long, but some days it will. It starts in the morning, about 20 minutes after I wake up, 30 minutes, and oftentimes it will last all day, and it'll go in spurts. But usually it's just in the morning for, I want to say, about 2 hours, and then I'll drink like ginger tea or take those little, I think it's called Nux vomica.
Have you ever checked your blood sugar when you wake up?
Not when I know.
So I want you to start checking your cheap ass monitor at Walmart. I mean, you can get one for like $20.
Around 2 o'clock.
That doesn't tell you anything.
know.
So I want you to check your I want you to check your blood sugar in the morning.
Okay.
And see if it's high. If it's high, you could have pre-diabetes type thing, but it could usually when your blood sugar is high in the morning, it's more to do with cortisol. Your liver wasn't maybe storing enough glycogen throughout the day, and then so especially anybody here wake up at 3 in the morning, your liver isn't storing enough glucose throughout the day, or you're not eating enough carbohydrates. And so what happens is you wake up in the morning and you can have high blood sugar because around 3 o'clock is when you ran out, and that's when your liver like kicks into a different gear and it starts pumping out cortisol to keep your blood sugar from dropping. And so you wake the fuck up and you feel wide awake. But then what happens is in the morning you have high blood sugar. It might not be super high, not like diabetic levels, but anything over 100, you're running off of cortisol. And that can make you feel nauseated. So if you're not eating enough before bed, and again, women have been taught to, don't eat 4 hours, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, I eat ice cream before I go to bed. And you'll sleep really well. It's crazy. If you try a high quality, something like Haagen-Dazs, especially their chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry has no other additives to it. They're pretty clean. There's nothing besides cream, sugar, and like strawberries or chocolate or vanilla. It can really help with that. But my question is, do you eat a lot of meat?
Yeah.
You do?
Not
Yeah.
a lot of red meat.
Not a lot of red meat. So.
But lately I have been eating a lot of red meat. My dad's been cooking steaks.
Yeah.
But I eat a lot of chicken.
Yeah.
And bacon, sausage.
So a lot of that stuff, especially, so the thing about B12 is it's in all meat, but it's mainly in red meat because you need a lot more of the heme iron, and heme has, it comes from blood. It's what hemoglobin is, but within that blood there's everything else, including bioavailable B12. Now, one of the symptoms of B12 deficiency is nausea. And when my daughter fell down the rabbit hole of her eating disorder, it was induced by them it was 2020 and I was just having a rough year like all of us. And they were like, she had an extra canine tooth coming in. And they were like, if I would have gone, I would have been like, just fucking pull it, right? Because she didn't have crooked teeth at all, just the one extra tooth. And they were like, no, we want to pull the bottom one and put braces on and make it move down and all this shit, right? Well, at the time I didn't know it, but did you know that like nitrous or anesthesia knocks all the B12 out of your cells? At the time I also didn't know that I had the intrinsic factor, which means that my gut can't really absorb a lot of B12, and that my daughter had it too. So my daughter turned into an entirely different person. It was fucking night and day, and then suddenly she was starving to death, and suddenly she wasn't hungry, and suddenly she was nauseated all the time. Now, I don't want to say that it was just the B12 for her, because they also gave her this huge pamphlet of food that she wasn't allowed to eat, and it caused fear for her. So she had ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive intake disorder. However, I'll tell you what, B12, figuring that out, made her morning nausea go away. B12, she still has a lot of like emotional work to do, but B12, every time, if she falls back on her shots, because she doesn't like getting them, you know, and sometimes I'm pretty good at them, but sometimes they hurt. There's no way around it, you know. I can tell when she starts getting nauseated again. So I would get that hormone panel done. It sounds like with the way you're bleeding, you're likely pretty estrogen dominant, which sounds like we all would be because we're women. But what actually happens is our foods are full of fucking phytoestrogens. And because estrogen stores in your fatty tissue, so when you do a blood test for estrogen levels, it's just a snapshot of what's in your blood at any given moment. So you can't really go off of what the levels show unless they're really elevated, right? But you go more off of symptoms. So if you really want to dig into estrogen dominance, I would look at the work of Dr. Raymond Peat. He recently passed away, and I will say look at his work, not all the people that rewrite his work. They take a lot of liberties and like change it because it's pro-metabolic eating and they want to make it into a diet versus learning how to eat. But when it comes to irregular periods, especially if your breasts are pretty tender while you're bleeding more than they used to be, that means your estrogen is through the roof, right? It's normal to have some tenderness, but if it's like off, you know what I mean? Like if it gets really bad, that's because you've got even more estrogen in your body when you're bleeding. So I would get your estrogen levels, but don't let them fuck around. Make sure they do the progesterone and the testosterone too. When it comes to male doctors, they're sexist as fuck. He'll be like, why would I check your testosterone levels? You're a woman, right? And I'm like, well, because we need it really badly. It's just that we have really tiny amounts, but because we have such low levels of testosterone naturally, any drop will fuck you up. It really will. But progesterone, when you dig into the work of Dr. Pete, you're going to learn a lot about progesterone. That would probably help with a lot of the tenderness and even the light bleeding and the irregular periods. But the dizziness may or may not be related to that. But I would really, really get your B12 levels tested. Now, of course, you can use things like ginger. I would make sure that I wouldn't drink ginger tea. I'd take a shot of ginger juice. You need way more of it. I like that, what's it called, like Ginger People. They make a pre-made juice. I stock that shit up. You can get it online, usually on Amazon, like a 3-pack for like $20, which is way cheaper than if you buy it in a local store. And then I just take, it's going to be spicy, but like put it in some, yeah. And that might help, but if you find that it's not really helping, I don't know, you need to find the root cause. And I know a lot of herbalists are like, take this herb, and I will talk about herbs, but like also I think people fuck around way too much and use herbs like a band-aid, just like a pharmaceutical. Yeah, so
my doctor's not wanting to find the root cause, and I'm sitting here, I'm tired of these masking.
Where you live, do you have different doctor options? Do you have a female doctor anywhere, like a gynecologist you can go see?
I can
Look around, even if you have to drive a little while.
I'm not sure anybody is closer to my insurance.
Look around and see if you can find, because like statistically, we know that especially when it comes to like hormone and gynecological and birth care, your odds are not in your fucking favor if it's a male doctor, I'll never forget my sister had her first and only baby when she was much older. And she wanted to do it naturally, and all this kind of stuff. And we're in the room and she's just getting started, and she starts having, real contractions. And she's like, oh, what do I do about this? And they could have offered her a myriad of things, even a slight amount of painkiller that wasn't, This fucking doctor comes in whistling like a literal Disney tune. I'm like, oh fuck. And it's a guy, and he's got way too much of a spray tan on, you know, type of guy. Like, you know, I don't know what type of car he drives, but I know what type of car he drives, you know. And he's like, oh, we're just gonna give you an, you know, an epidural. And she goes, but I don't want one. And he goes, are you in pain? And she's like, yeah. And he goes, I don't know what woman is psychologically well. Whoever chooses to feel this pain, they're mentally unwell. And I was fucking livid, you know. And I'm just like, oh. And she's like, oh, and then surprise, it took you like 10 extra hours to give birth, and which is no shame if anybody wants to do that, but your body can't feel that it has to push, and so it makes it take so much longer, and it just pissed me off. But that's what you're up against. You might not be giving birth, but it's, even if he seems like a nice man, he still has been trained by a medical system that treats men, right? And don't be afraid to talk to a doctor who's not a gynecologist. Maybe find a functional medicine doctor. They like doing tests. That's why I like them. They're like, yeah, your insurance isn't going to cover this test, but we're going to do it anyways. They're like, you're going to give like a full fucking gill of blood. But sometimes that scattergun approach is helpful because they'll hit on the head eventually. And most of the time, I'd say your insurance company does cover stuff, but on occasion they're like, you know, you have to sign this because we're not going to cover this. But it's usually, if you find out, it was worth the expense. But in that packet that I handed out, look at the B12 tests. You can order them yourself if you have anywhere that does. If you hop on to Walk-In Labs, they'll tell you where like the local places, like ours, where we're at, is in the Tri-Cities. I think they have them in Yakima too, and things like in this whole area. We have a lot of them, like Quest and stuff. You can order your own labs, but you do have to be able to interpret them. But sometimes it's not that hard, and the labs typically put the letter H or L if something is high or low, and that at least it gives you the ability to take that lab work to the doctor and be like, here, fucking do it. Like wherever I don't know where he's at. Wherever he went, he kept getting like shingles outbreaks from stress because we don't live a fucking calm life. And you know, we're pretty young, and so it's more common when you're older to get shingles. And he was just run down all the time. We were working with a functional medicine doctor, and she was nice enough, but eventually she just learned to just do the test I asked for. But she was, and she would just let us write in the portal, and she just order it. And I liked that because there's some stuff that I can't order, even though I'm pretty resourceful. But we started looking around, and I was like, I think he has enteric shingles. And she goes, that's really rare. And I'm like, cool, I think he has enteric shingles. Can you please test him right now? Test, because you have to do like a stool test, and like you have to test in that moment to see how high the load is in your body to see if you have a shingles outbreak. They can tell if you've had it from a long time ago or active or whatever. And she was like, holy shit, he has full-blown shingles right now, but no sores on his body. I was like, yeah, it's in his gut, and he's shitting blood. We need, and so, you know, I was like, yeah, you're gonna take fucking Valtrex at the moment to knock it down, and then we can work for it from there. But she had no idea it was enteric shingles. So it's okay to dig to figure out what it was on your own, and then approach the doctor with it. So all that to say, sorry, B12 test. Make sure that you get the tests that are on the paper, because the one from your blood, they just test what's in your body as a whole. But half of it's active and half of it's not. And so like, let's say they come back and they're like, oh, you've got a level of 400, you're fine. You could have a severe B12 deficiency of 390 of that's non-active, right? And then there's a pee test you can do too, where they see how much is bonding to your urine when you pee or if it's not. That would be a good place to start. And remember, if you supplement B12 before you do any testing, your tests are fucked. And the thing about B12 is once you start supplementing injections or whatever you're doing, you have to go off of symptoms, not labs. Because like, so like if you tested my B12 right now, it'd probably be like 1,500 and a doctor would shit a brick. But the funny thing is there's no toxic level of B12. It's water soluble. You pee out what you don't need. In fact, if you ever get cyanide poisoning, they're gonna give you like a whole ass bag of B12 because it bonds to the toxins and you pee it out. That's why things like mold and chemical exposure and heavy metals can make you B12 deficient, because it's one of its jobs is to bond and make you pee it out. But it doesn't hurt you, but they get scared because they know nothing about B12. And I'm like, you literally can't hurt yourself with B12. Now, you can take so much without taking cofactors and crash other, because the body works in harmony, not individually. And usually, if you've got B12 deficiency, you also probably have potassium deficiency, and you probably don't have enough heme iron going on. Those two things have to be taken with it in a cofactor form, like you have to be eating a bunch of potassium-rich food and making sure that you're eating enough meat or bioavailable heme iron as a supplement. I don't recommend the normal iron supplements. You just shit them out and they make you have a headache and constipated. But there's this brand, I think it's called, no, it's like 3 Arrows or something like that. But anything that's actually heme iron, it'll say HEME, because that's what you get when you eat meat, right? But with potassium, get it from food. It's easy to fuck yourself up with a potassium supplement, and then you can hurt your heart a lot. But eating it from food like coconut water, potatoes, oranges, but not orange juice, because unless you press it yourself, because when they pasteurize it, it fucking kills the copper and the potassium. I mean, there's still some in it, but yeah. So I would look into all of that stuff.
Okay.
I know. I'm sorry. I know I'm much.
I haven't been able to find anybody that's really digging in and like.
Yeah. Well, and if you could find a functional medicine doctor, they are good at digging. And these days, most of them do accept insurance.
Okay.
I have found about 5 years ago, not many did, but more and more. Like my mom's going to one now, and she accepts insurance, and that's
insurance, but not state insurance.
They might. It depends. It depends if they're set up through a clinic or not. Most of them are. What you have to ask them is if they're set up for private MOTA, or whatever. If you're not from Oregon, you're from Oregon, right? Washington. So they might have a different thing, but find their version of private insurance. Like if your state insurance is through like Blue Cross, ask them if they take Blue Cross, because if they're set up to take, like in Oregon, if they're set up to take MOTA that's private, they're set up to take Oregon Health Plan too. It just depends if it's in their network in general, because we think about it as like Oregon Health Plan is through the state, but really what it is the state is paying for your health insurance through a private company. So it's just figuring out which one will take it. But don't be afraid to like fall down rabbit holes anymore. The more I talk to people, most people in our current medical complex in the United States are solving their own issues and then finding a doctor to help them with it. And every one of you are smart enough to do that. Every one of you. You really are. I gave up a long time ago. Last year, or the year before that, anybody else have like a problem separating the last 3 years? I'm like, it's all just one thing right now. I woke up and something fucking weird happened, and I had like a hardcore depersonalization episode I'd never had before. And I was like, I feel like I'm a different person. I walked up to my husband, I'm like, don't freak out, but, and it was like a full on, like when you depersonalize like that, you believe you're yourself or somebody different. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. And I was like, but even in my hallucinating state, I was like, check my blood sugar, because I thought it was maybe really high. It was so low, the meter couldn't read it. So, that's when I fell down a huge amount of rabbit holes and discovered my B12 issues, because you need it for glucose stabilization and processing and all that type of stuff. But long story short, it took me a fucking year to get into an endocrinologist. And I mean, that's how long the appointment took. I walk in there and this motherfucker is obviously on cocaine. I'm not lying. It was to the point that towards the end he's like, we can like meet up in a public place and I'll like get to the parking lot. I was like, you gonna deal me some fucking glucose meters? Because it was the CGM, and I was like, what the fuck? But anyhow, do you know what he said to me? He said, you're fat and need to lose weight. You have diabetes. And I said, well, I'm really curious about the cortisol correlation, and my mouth has been burning, so I'm interested in a B12 test. And he goes, no, none of that stuff matters. You just have diabetes. He threw me a fucking Dexcom and was like, work on losing weight. I'm like, motherfucker, I'm like within my BMI. I was so underweight all my life from no access to food and like disordered eating from not knowing when to feel hunger cues because I was homeless, And so it was just really, I was like, well, that was fucking worth nothing. And then I had another one that was 6 months out. And I was like, fuck it, I'll keep that one and see what he says. And he was like, this guy, he was nicer, but he was like, I can give you a medication that will block your body's ability to absorb any carbohydrates. I'm like, that's a cool story, but I was wondering if you could please test this stuff for me. And he goes, well, you might just, some people have diabetes. I'm like, no. And so what it really came down to was the B12, and then I learned about my heightened capacity to have high glutamine in my brain from benzo damage, because they put me on those for a decade for PTSD and stuff. And I shit you not, as soon as I started working on lowering my glutamate levels, I woke up and my blood sugar was in the 80s instead of 110. And if I would have listened to them, I would have just been on a fucked up medication that people are using in LA to diet right now. I looked it up. It's like super hard to find because people want to take it to lose weight, and it's fucked up. And my B12 I'd probably have far more neurological symptoms right now, because eventually, without enough B12 in your body, they're going to diagnose you with MS. Or they're going to start saying that you have vertigo issues, or that you have B12, and I know I talk about it a lot, but it's fucking blew my mind when on that pamphlet that I gave out on the website, you go to the symptoms and the misdiagnosis, there's at least 1,000 plus things there that people get diagnosed with when it was actually B12. It's a fucking epidemic. And you want to know why it's gotten so bad? Because in the 1990s, the USDA allowed them to put synthetic folic acid in our food. And the doctors came out, and this is probably going to get me taken off of YouTube, I should have been talking about it, but a lot of doctors came out and said, please don't do this, because folic acid, which is garbage, you want to take folate, not folic acid, it makes it look like you have enough B12 in your body while systematically stripping you of B12 from your body. So if you look at the correlation of like B12 deficiency, MS, all these other things that irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, all these things, mental health issues, by the way, schizophrenia, they've done all these tests in different countries where I think it's like 40 to 45% of the time, they were able to use particular B vitamins, and they weren't schizophrenic, they were literally had no B vitamins in their body. And so, but we add this to our food, it's in everything, and then we're like, why am I sick all the time? I fantasize about moving to Europe, I really do. And I know Europe is vast, like different countries, it's not just one continent, but half of the shit that is in our food here is illegal there. And it's fucking crazy. It just agitates me, because I'm like, people try so hard, and then like, who has the money to afford the stuff that isn't adulterated? And arguably the stuff that isn't adulterated is still being sprayed with water that we are allowing to be treated and have pesticides and forever chemicals in it that are banned in other countries. So it's like, are you really getting organic food? Plus it doesn't fucking taste like anything. Can we just admit that these days? I'm like,
You grow a lot of your own food.
I kind of do, but here it's nice and warm until it's really not. We can't really, where I live, this is lower elevation than where I live, we can still get a hard frost in late June. So it's like, and I kind of do, and lately, I've had to choose between work and my daughter and big gardens, and obviously I have to pick work and my daughter. So right now we're growing dirt, and I don't even have a fucking lawn. The goats, I'm just like, fuck it, I don't give a shit. I'm gonna cover it all with rock because they'll protect me from fire anyways. No, we have a lot of pastures, so it's not gonna fuck up the ecosystem. I know people are probably gonna at me about that, but I'm not afraid to stack rocks. I don't think that's gonna kill the environment like a lot of people think, right? Like, can we just?
I know, it's not crazy.
But we do still raise quite a bit of our own meat, and by meat I mean cows, and then we have milk goats. We have a milk cow too, but she didn't get bred. Yeah, we just have two, but I worked really hard and I got a really high quality Nubian I don't fuck with the little goats. If anybody does, that's fine, but I'm like, ugh. They escape. They're just amazing little escape artists, and there's so much. Anyhow, so we have her and a Saanen, and we get about between 2.5 to 3 gallons a day just from those two goats.
Do you like the milk, the taste?
Oh yeah. I think obviously I like the Nubian better because they're more sweet, and Betty's a little bit more goaty. I like the Nubians, the full breeds. I don't like the small breed goats. They're not bad goats, but people get tricked into thinking that, oh, I'm gonna have this for my homestead or my little tiny area and it'll fit better, but it's like you get like a pint of milk and they eat just as much food.
Nigerians.
Yeah, and so for I was like, I'd rather have 2 goats that are far too lazy to try to go over a fence because they're too big, and I feed them less, and I only need 2 of them, and I get more milk than I need, honestly. You know.
As far as the flavor, is it
Uh,
different flavor?
yeah,
between
so
Nigerian and the-
so Nubians have a really sweet milk. If nobody hears, or if they're like, I don't know if I like the flavor of goat milk, start with a Nubian because they have a really high butterfat content and it's just sweet and it tastes like normal milk. Now, Betty's a Saanen, and I picked her because Saanens don't fuck around. She's only 2 years old and she gives a gallon a day with just 1 milking. She's kid sharing right now, so if I was milking her twice a day, I could probably get 2 gallons off of her, off of one little goat named Betty. And if you get good lines, as they get older and the more times they've bred out, like by the time they're 4, there have been Saanens that give almost 4 gallons of milk a day. That is comparable to a heritage breed milk cow, except for I can yank this thing around without it stepping on my foot or being angry at me, you know. And but we have Maggie. She's a brown Swiss milk cow. She's a sweetheart. She doesn't intentionally step on feet. You just have to watch where you're walking around a cow. But she's got good milk too. And I like the brown Swiss milk cows because they were bred in an area where the pasture is just shit. It's just garbage. So they are really excellent at pulling nutrition out of subpar pastures. Because I can't afford no milk cow that can only eat high quality alfalfa all winter long. Right? Like that's expensive, especially now. We only got 10 tons of feed in, which sounds a lot to anybody who doesn't have animals, but that's not going to last me long. Even we only have 3 cattle left right now, and we have 5 goats, but 3 of them are going to freezer camp because they're bucks. But we'll wait till fall. But we got 10 tons, and that'll maybe get us through until end of January. I needed 25 or 30, but I can't afford to buy it all at once. And even that amount was a fucking chunk of money, you know. But the trade-off is I know that my meat is clean.
Yes.
I know that my milk is clean. I know that it's, you know, and my daughter has lactose issues. So the goat milk is a lot easier on her stomach depending on the day, or if she's been eating other dairy she's not supposed to, you know. But yeah, I do like the goats. But yeah, so anybody else got a question? Okay.
Chronic dry sinuses and inflammation.
Yeah.
I suspect kind of it's an allergy, but to try to break it down to what allergy is almost impossible
Well,
to detect.
do you have an HVAC system in your house? Like central air? Okay. And do you live somewhere where it's naturally humid?
So we're in the southwest part of the state of Washington State.
Okay, so you're so you're over towards the coast, so it's not just a matter of like you're in a dry. Right. Do you feel better when you're not in your house? Like if you leave somewhere for a few days, do you kind of notice any sort of difference at all? Even if it's.
I noticed when I was in Lake Chelan, I didn't have any problems.
And were you there for a little while away from your house?
Yeah, about a week.
Something in your house. Right. If we leave our house and we feel better, it's something in our house. Right. It's probably not something in your environment because like your outside environment. Now it can be, but if you're having it all the time, there ain't no one plant that's putting off pollen all the time. Have you ever had your house checked for mold? Yeah, get your house checked for mold. In the meantime, you can do things like the nourishing herbal infusion of linden, anything like chickweed infusion, making sure that you're getting plenty of electrolytes, which remember that's like potassium, magnesium, sodium, and all that type of stuff, to make sure that you're not dehydrated. But If it gets better when you're not in your house, it's your house.
Well,
And 80% of the houses in the US have mold anyways.
Well,
it's not. It doesn't always get better because I just feel like I'm sensitive to everything. Dust.
It could be, but the thing about mold exposure is it makes you sensitive to everything. Right? Because your system's so worked up. Now, you could try, of course, like adding a humidifier to your room at night where you sleep. Turn it off when you're not in there because you don't want to build up too much moisture. But is there anywhere in your house, even just one little room, that smells more musty than the others? Do you know? Well, have somebody else go sniff through your house. And I know that sounds weird. But the thing is, when we're exposed to mold and like listen, I'm not a cat person, but my daughter is. We now have 3 cats. I bet my house smells like cats. And I don't notice it, even though I got a really nice litter box that hides. I'm like, I don't fuck around. I wanted the thing that like cleans it and hides it. But I bet if somebody who doesn't have cats walks in there, they would smell cats. If somebody walks into your house and sniffs around for you and they're not living somewhere where there's a lot of mold, they might smell it might not be like really bad, like you're like, oh, that's, but like, like when you walk into a basement and it smells kind of musty, they might be able to smell that difference when you're not able to because your olfactory nerves are used to it. And mold is really insidious. It can grow where you don't think it'll grow, and it can live where you don't think it'll live, and it's pretty crazy. We've been dealing with it ever since we had like the tiniest leak in the world that we fixed in like one day, and now it's like it's a pain in the ass because it's in an attic that we don't have access to because we live in a manufactured home and they don't put a way for you to get up there, so we're having to like take out like the exhaust fans in the bathroom, and so we can like throw cans of stuff up in there because you can't get to it otherwise, and I can't afford to have them come rip all my ceilings out and and redo all that stuff. But there's also some air filters you could try. If you find something that's pretty good at grabbing out microns, there's this one company called, I want to say it's like Biocide Labs. They call them mold bombs, but it doesn't actually kill the mold. It's non-toxic. What it basically does is you set it off and you leave the house, right? But it's a particle grabber. You can use it to grab all the particles in the air in your house, and then you turn on a filter and it pulls it all in, and then you dust it all down, right? But basically it can grab the mycotoxins or the VOCs or anything that's in your house causing a smell. You don't have to use it just for mold. People use it if it's like new construction or like something died and it was there for a while. People set them off in houses before they show them to hide smells too. But it grabs all the particles out of the air. So if you do that, and you've got this going on, you might be able to discover that it was something in your house if it makes it better for you. But you also, beyond all that, let's assume it's not mold at all. Sometimes when your sinuses are really dry, it's a symptom of dehydration. And remember, even though they tell us to drink so much fucking water that our kidneys are screaming, water doesn't hydrate you, minerals do. And we need water, don't get me wrong, but if you don't have minerals in your water, and most of us don't, because they strip it, they clean it, they chlorinate it, people have been starting to drink distilled water. I'm like, you are gonna die. Like there's nothing in that water for you, so you might order some of those trace mineral drops. They taste like shit, I'm not gonna lie. People are like, add them to your water. I'm like, don't do that. Power through taking the teaspoon and then don't taste it the rest of the day versus adding it to your water, and that might help. But again, just like when I talked to her about her issues, find the cause too. And it could be that you're dehydrated, but it also could be that your house has mold. I think everybody should get a mold test for their house. They're pretty affordable these days. And we're always going to have some mold in our house. We can't be like, oh shit, there's like some amount of mold, but like it's that black mold. Any amount of that black mold is going to fuck you up. And those tests, they range from anywhere between $40 to $150. If you can save up for it or afford it, get the more expensive one. Because those cheap ones, we did a cheap one that we bought from Home Depot, told us that we didn't have any mold. I'm like, I can smell the mold, so I know it's full of shit. So then I bought the more expensive one, and it's like, you have enough mold spores in your house that you shouldn't be living there. I'm like, fuck, right? Because I have to live there. And so we just started, and it's way better than it was just from that one fucking room, right? But before we could eventually smell it, it was already bad and we couldn't smell it, so definitely get the mold checked out. And I know people don't like to hear that, right? But again, you could use the hydrating herbs too and see if that helps. Does it drip at all down the back of your throat? Like you have like,
Yeah, it gets really thick. It's like thick and dry. Yeah.
okay.
I've had it for years though, even before I lived in this house.
Oh, okay.
I've had it for a very long time.
How was the house old you lived in before?
Um,
Like before you moved into this place, was the house you lived in relatively old?
I wouldn't say it was a really.
Okay, sometimes it's like, I've seen people be like, okay, well, I lived in a different house and I had this problem too, and so I moved into this house, so it can't be that problem. But what if both houses had mold? Right? Like, that's kind of. And there are some blood tests you can do to see if you have like an IGF, I think that's what it's called, IgA antibodies, to see if you're allergic to mold and if it's flaring, right? And those are pretty simple to get. Most doctors will allow you to do it. What they'll do about it, I can't say after you test positive for it, because they don't really, they're like, oh, air it out, but it would be something to look into. And then, do you ever drink like nettle infusion or anything like that?
I haven't done the nettles. I have lots of mallow growing in my yard.
Yeah, mallow's not a bad one, but if it's an allergy, let's assume it's an allergy, which technically mold would be an allergy. If you start drinking nettle infusion, it might dry up that post-nasal drip. Now, nettle is kind of drying though, and she's a little bit of a diuretic, so she'll make you pee. So, if you're gonna use nettle, I also want you to make sure that you're working with electrolytes, right? Because you don't want to compound the issue if it's dehydration. But if it's allergies, she's really good at drying things up and slowing things down. Now, if anybody has allergies that aren't wet, meaning you're not blowing snot out of your nose, and it's just constantly plugged up here, that's typically from inflammation. So it's being inflamed, right? That's why you can be like, like nothing happens, and then you don't even know you're trying to clear your nose, but it makes it worse because then you're irritating the tissue. You could use something like Pearly Everlasting, or even the Linden's anti-inflammatory. Pearly Everlasting is a little harder to find, but if it's, I don't know, it's an immune response for sure. And that's why my brain just keeps going back to mold, because if it's a seasonal allergy, like let's say you're allergic to the ragweed that everyone's going to blame on goldenrod here pretty soon. What happens is you usually make a lot of snot because your immune system says we need to flush this out, and that's what your snot is there for. But if it's really dry and swollen, it's inflammation, and that tells me typically that it's not necessarily a pollen that your body's trying to flush out. Now, people can have that alongside of a pollen allergy, but usually alongside of that, they also have like watering eyes and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so if there's something is pissing off your immune system, and because you breathe a lot through your nose at night, most people do, unless we're mouth breathers, but
Well, it's so inflamed, sore, and clogged. I mean,
yeah.
that I typically don't. It's hard for me to breathe through my nose.
Yeah, so something you're breathing in is causing a lot of inflammation. So, I mean, you could get an allergy test if you haven't had a panel done. Those are kind of iffy. I mean, they definitely can tell you things you're allergic to, but like, I've had people be like, I'm allergic to nettle on this test. I'm like, no shit. Everybody's allergic to the nettle sting.
Right.
That's like the point of the sting, but it doesn't mean that you're, like, they told my husband that like he was like deathly allergic to cats. That cat lays on him all the time and he doesn't have any symptoms. It just depends on how your own, like, I don't know, maybe if we inject a cat hair into our skin, it'll react. So
Right.
it's kind of, it doesn't mean that we don't have allergies and that we can't find answers from that. And honestly, when they do that panel, when they poke you on the back, they're looking for more of what's causing more inflammation. But don't fall victim to their desire to give you the allergy shot all the time. Those things fuck people up, and they don't tell people this half the time, but they're like, oh, take these allergy shots, and then basically we're giving you this pre-made cocktail just for you of the things you're allergic to, and then eventually you won't react to it. I get the concept, and in theory it's sound, but and I told my husband not to do it. I said, don't do him. He's going to do him anyways. And then he's like constantly dead, tired all the time, started developing shingles that he'd never had before. And I'm like, stop taking the fucking allergy shots. Because if you read about the allergy shots, they're really, really, really bad at running down your immune system, in particular your NK cells, your natural killer cells, your lymphocytes, your white blood cells, because your body is constantly freaking out over this thing that's being injected into it. But then they don't tell you that, oh, by the way, you're not supposed to take these shots if you live with any stress or are going through any stressful event. What the fuck? Nobody in this country has a business taking that shot, you know? Okay, so it's been an hour. Oh, this person said poison ivy. Yes, everybody is sensitive to that, unless you drink goat milk that's been eating poison ivy. That's really common. You can eat like what's fucking crazy is like they'll eat the poison ivy, and then if you drink their milk on a consistent basis, you won't react to poison ivy or oak. It's nuts. And that's like an old school knowledge thing too. People do it for a long time, but anyhow, it's the one comment I'm going to answer on there. So thank you guys so much for watching and hanging out for an hour. I don't know how much any of this hurt or if this thing worked. If it didn't, we'll figure it out and you'll live. So thanks so much for hanging out, and I'll see you next time, folks. And don't worry, this will be uploaded and saved. So bye. People yelling at me like crazy in that. If I don't watch it.